Hey, so just wanted to give some quick context for this video. I'm going to be rambling for a bit, so if you don't want to hear this, you just want to get straight into the video, just skip to the next chapter on the video. I just kind of wanted to give some context for why a video about something that happened in April is coming out in June, 2 whole months after the actual event happened. So back in April, when this leak happened that I'm about to talk about, a whole bunch of people covered it, but most of the people that I saw covered it right after it happened, and they didn't really have like concrete, solid information that was like decent about this leak, and a lot of them were like, "Oh, this is rumored, and this is an alleged leak and stuff," and sort of the kind of language that you would use if somebody like said something on 4chan, as opposed to having physical files you can go in and check and ask experts about, like people who know this kind of stuff. And that really rubbed me the wrong way. And a lot of them like skipped over details or got details wrong. And I kind of was just really frustrated, and I wanted to create a video that sort of compiled all the information, as well as like making sure that I got all the facts right and everything. So starting like a couple days after the leak happened, I decided, okay, that's going to be me. I'm going to make that video. And I got to work on collecting information. And then a bit later, I think like a couple weeks later, I found LuigiBlood, and I found their information that they had compiled, and I'm like, oh god, this is going to make it so much easier. So I tweeted at LuigiBlood, I'm like, hey, can I use this? I'm working on a video. LuigiBlood's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And that's awesome. Nice. Unfortunately, not long after that, I had a bout of depression, followed by a vacation with family members that was very traumatic, followed by recovering from said traumatic vacation, followed by another bout of depression, followed by me desperately trying to get back into my routine. So that's where my last 2 months has been. Just a series of just circumstances that prevented me from doing anything. And to a certain extent, it is my fault, because before that first bout of depression, there was about a week or two of time. I think like a week of time between me getting access to all of that information and when I started being depressed. And I just sort of executive dysfunctioned my way into not doing much of anything for the project for that entire week. So if you're wondering why, a video is coming out 2 months after a thing happened, this is why. It's not because it was a particularly difficult video to make. I mean, if you've seen any of my videos, you know what my production quality is like. I am by no means somebody who is an expert at video production or audio mixing or anything like that. It's literally just because of a combination of depression, ADHD, and just bad circumstances. So all that said, kind of get that out of the way at the start of the video, let's get into the actual content of the video. So back in April, on 4chan, a bunch of files were leaked, 3 specific things in particular. First up is a 2019 build of the Nintendo Switch Online service, as well as a 2019 build of a Game Boy Color emulator, and a 2020 build of a Game Boy Advance emulator. And there has been a lot of sort of discussion on these sorts of things since that came out. And I just sort of wanted to compile everything, have everything in one place, and just have it be easily accessible so that people like know what's up and know the facts from the fiction. And I'm going to be giving my own opinion on this whole ordeal as well. most of the credit for this is going to go to LuigiBlood. They're a very knowledgeable person when it comes to emulation and stuff like that. And it's only because of their compiled research and their compiled knowledge that I was able to get this video out at all. So I will be leaving links to their stuff in the description so that you can go look at their the things that they have done for yourself. And I will also be linking to the specific articles and tweets and such that I talk about later in this video. So the NSO build that leaked, out of the 3 things that were leaked, the NSO build is from 2019, more specifically October the 4th, and it contains all games that were released up through August the 21st of that year, as well as games that were released across the next few years up to present, and a bunch of still unreleased games, including things like Tetris, Mega Man, the first 2 Castlevania games, special versions of Mega Man, and plenty of other stuff. Whether these are actually ever going to be released, or if they are just there to test the emulators, is completely unknown at this point. All of the games are playable, and they even have multi-language descriptions. So the fact that someone went in there to do that does kind of imply that these games will eventually come out. It's just that Nintendo really loves their drip feed, despite the fact that what they're drip feeding us are games from the 1980s. If you can't tell, I'm not exactly happy with how Nintendo handles this sort of thing. But regardless, moving on. In addition to the NSO build, a bunch of files of the Hiyoko emulator, which is a Game Boy Color emulator, were also leaked. Now, despite the fact that the latest build date in this batch of files is from 2019, more specifically March the 6th, we've actually known about the existence of Hiyoko since as early as December of 2018. This was back with the 2.0.0 update for Nintendo Switch Online. And in the code of that update, people were able to find emulator enumeration. First off is count, which is just a count of how many emulators there are, pretty standard industry practice. And then there were 3 others, which at the time was a bit weird because we only had NES Online. We didn't have SNES Online yet, we just had the one. So we had Kachi Kachi, which is the internal name for the NES emulator. There's Canoe, which at the time was the name of the emulator that was only on the Super Nintendo Classic, which later that emulator was put on Nintendo Switch Online. And third and finally was Hiyoko, which at the time people speculated was probably a Game Boy and Game Boy Color emulator. Turns out their speculation was right. Now, you might have noticed that Kachi Kachi and Hiyoko are Japanese names, whereas Canoe is an English word for a type of boat. More specifically, Kachi Kachi and Hiyoko are Hanafuda playing card terms. The way that these emulators are named essentially tells you whether they are developed completely in-house by Nintendo European Research and Development, who are the development team working for Nintendo who make these emulators, or if it is something that somebody else made and they're simply adding on to or just doing something with to make it playable on Switch, which is the case with the Super Nintendo emulator, as well as for the Nintendo 64 emulator, whose codename is Hovercraft, by the way. This is going to become relevant later. Those 2 emulators specifically, the SNES one is based off of the Nintendo 64 emulator on Wii U, and I'm not entirely sure what the N64 emulator is based on. I've heard that it's based off of something that IQ made, which is a Chinese company that deals with Nintendo products in China, but I'm not 100% sure on that, so I'm not going to say anything definitively. So the Hiyoko build that we have, or rather the builds that we have, only have 4 games that were used for them, which is Super Mario Land, Tetris, Quicks, and Link's Awakening DX. And it's possible that it was just really, really early in development and they'd only really had those 4 games to test with. It's unclear, but there are some things in there that suggest that's not the case, and there are other games. Those games just did not leak with all of these files. So some of the support that can be found in this emulator are the Game Boy Color mode from Game Boy Advance, which on certain games unlocks certain features. It has emulation support for different screen types, as well as ghosting that happens on certain screens. It has partial implementation of tilt controls, and it also has some support for rollback netcode, asymmetric netplay support, and support to have 2 instances open on the same system and have a link cable between them for multiplayer and trading Pokemon and stuff like that. And I think you'll notice what I said earlier, partial implementation of tilt controls. That is not in any of the 4 games that we ended up getting with this leak, which says to me there are other games that they were testing with it. Those just didn't leak with these files. And another thing I should specify is this emulator seems to be in a bit of an early state, or a bit of a weird state, because each game is its own application rather than having a single application for Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. Moving on to the 3rd leaked batch of files, it is an emulator called Sloop, which emulates Game Boy Advance games. You might notice that Sloop is definitely not Japanese. It is in fact an English word for a type of boat. I don't think anybody had heard the word sloop except for boat people prior to the release of this emulator. Or rather, the leaking of this emulator. It technically has not released yet. Now, the latest build date that we can find in these files is August the 19th of 2020. And it has the following features, although keep in mind this is a development build, so some of these features might just be for development. And keep that in mind retroactively for Hiyoko. Sorry for not saying that. So it has support for changing the gamma of the screen, has support for Game Boy Advance ghosting, which that's probably going to stay in the final build because some games do use ghosting for transparency. It has rewind functionality. It has ROM patching, which is, LuigiBlood says that it is being used for anti-epilepsy reasons. It has support for the local link cable thing, just like the Game Boy emulator does. And it has support for netplay with random matchmaking. Although this might have evolved since then, since that to me seems a bit limited. It also supports the exportation to easy flash format, which Nintendo has been very against, like, vocally as a company, but these are developers. They're going to use whatever they can. LuigiBlood actually has a whole article about why it's not weird that the leaked emulators use flash support, and I will be linking that down in the description alongside all of my other links, so go ahead and check that out after the video is over. Now, something interesting to note is that Sloop actually passes all but one accuracy test, both the AGS aging test and Nintendo's own internal tests, which is incredibly impressive. Basically, no emulators can really do that well. And the results on the AGS aging test are actually unique to the Sloop emulator. And both Hiyoko and Sloop do not code-wise match any emulator that is available through the internet, which very, very much lends credence to the idea that, yes, these are legitimate. These are actual files that leaked from Nintendo themselves. These are not, you know, some pet project or some other emulator dressed up as a Nintendo emulator. These are completely unique. These are from Nintendo. And as a side note, I just want to point out that in April of 2021, a Nintendo maintenance tweet got sent out that has the same title ID as the Sloop emulator. And while this could be a coincidence, LuigiBlood has looked into it, and it does look like this is probably maintenance that actually happened relating to that emulator, because other maintenances on Nintendo Switch Online have also matched the emulator that was being worked on. So, for anybody wondering if these emulators are fake or if these emulators are real, they're real. Like, just heads up, this is the opinion zone, but they're real. I cannot say with 100% certainty that they're real, but I can say they're real with the same level of confidence that I can say that there's probably a computer in front of me that I am recording this on. I am probably speaking into a microphone. It could be that I am a crazy person and I'm in an asylum and I'm hallucinating all of this. And none of you exist because nobody's ever gonna hear this because I'm not actually making a YouTube video. But no, that's not the case. I'm making a YouTube video. You guys are hearing me, or all 10 of you that actually clicked on the video are hearing me. And yeah, these are actual leaked files from Nintendo. Like, there's no disputing this once you know all of the information. Now, just as sort of an aside, since I couldn't really find anywhere to fit it in the video, there are actually other emulators that we know about that Nerd has developed or worked on that also have not yet hit the Nintendo Switch. More specifically, the Huggy emulator, which technically hits Switch if you tweak the definition a little bit, because it was the emulator that was used to run Super Mario Sunshine on the Mario 3D All-Stars collection, and was used for minor emulation things with Galaxy. It did not fully emulate Galaxy, it just emulated some audio stuff and some video stuff. It did not emulate anything in terms of the actual game. That was a native port. In addition to Huggy, there is also Hachi Hachi, not to be confused with Kachi Kachi, which is the NES emulator. Hachi Hachi is the first emulator, actually, that Nintendo European Research and Development, to remind everybody, it was the first emulator that Nerd worked on and made for Nintendo all the way back on the Wii U. They were responsible for making the Nintendo DS emulator. So not only do we have Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance to look forward to at some point in the future, but we also basically have GameCube and Nintendo DS nailed down as almost definitely coming to the system at some point. Which of course only leaves Wii and 3DS, because let's be honest, Wii U is not coming to Nintendo Switch. It might come to some future, much more powerful console, but it's not coming to Nintendo Switch. Not with having to emulate two screens and the fact that sometimes only certain players are supposed to see the second screen. It's a lot, and I doubt Nintendo is going to put any effort into doing something like that. So yeah, we have a lot to look forward to in the future, at least when it comes to emulators on the Nintendo Switch. And that's kind of nice. It just sucks that Nintendo insists on drip feeding a lot of this stuff to us. It makes sense why it's taking so long for them to put all these emulators on the system, because about half of them are just made from scratch emulators, and those take a while. Plus the fact that the Game Boy Advance emulator is so accurate to the original Game Boy Advance, that's absolutely incredible, honestly. So yeah, I think that's about everything that I wanted to say. Honestly, I did not expect this video to go on for nearly 20 minutes. I expected this to be maybe a 10-minute video. But turns out, when you have a lot of things to say, it takes a while to say them. I hope I didn't bore anybody. I hope that this was informative, or maybe there's a video out there that was made in the last 2 months that's like 400 times better than mine, in which case, talk about it down in the comments, feed the YouTube algorithm, make my channel grow, you know, the channel that I use to make like 3 videos a year, if that. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Hope you have a great day. Like and subscribe if that's the thing that you want to do. And I'll see you guys probably at the June Direct. See ya.